Oh, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, they're giving you a warning.
Did you
I
hear
guess
that?
people. Yeah, yeah. I imagine that's just to protect the safety and consent of others to be recorded during these
Mm, yeah.
Zoom meetings happening all over the world.
I thought people could see if it's that it's being
Yeah, I thought.
recorded.
Yeah, that's true to a degree.
Okay, so yeah, like we were talking about earlier, do you want to just share? You said you hadn't really thought about it too much.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going to come out. I don't have any like preparatory remarks or anything like that. But yeah, so basically, I we were scheduled to meet right earlier in the week.
Mhm.
I think it was Monday or Tuesday, and yeah, the first day I canceled because work was just sort of overwhelming, and there was a lot of stuff that did not see coming. And then I guess that's generally life. Because the next day it sure happened again. Yeah, the
Yeah,
day that we rescheduled, right? So that was earlier in the week. So I got a chance to sit with it through the week. But basically, throughout the day, I was having so while I was at work, actually doing my work, I started to have I have a lot of time potentially that my mind can kind of wander places as much as I'm trying to focus it on the task at hand.
mhm.
But I started to get uh, I want to say, well, glimpses comes to mind, but I think it was more than glimpses. They were just really strong and sort of profound feelings, emotions. And when I say emotions in particular, there I was getting these waves of sadness, and it really, really reminded me of the episode I had of where I carried that same feeling for more than well, more most of my life, really, but in the actual acute sort of episode crisis, if you will, that was a standout sort of sensation and feeling, and it was one of just real like profound sadness and a sense of feeling alone. Now that used to scare me, um, particularly in trying to unpack these things and understand them from sort of a narrative point of view. Like, why I'm having this. When I say narrative, let me clarify how I used to associate this feeling. I used to have a story attached to it, right? Like the reason this is coming up is because I was treated this way or not treated this way when I was young.
Your mic is making some weird scratchy noises.
It's
I
just
think
because it's is that better? I
just
think it was
when
from
you moved, like
I'm in my rocking chair.
that's fine. Okay. Yeah, that's sorry, interrupt. Yeah,
So
so you had narrative
yeah,
story.
so I used to attach some meaning to this sensation when it would arise and interpret it right through my mind would create all these reasons for why I was having this feeling.
Hmm.
And sure enough, in the moment, that's what my mind was started to do, right? Like as this
Hmm.
sensation came up of the feeling alone, and it started with this kind of story of like it reminded me, like, oh yeah, you are alone, for instance, because I'm not in partnership. I live alone, and there was sort of a uh, not self pity, more like a sense of longing. There was just a sense of longing for companionship, um, to be with someone to try to extinguish this sense of being alone. And once, like, I started to recognize this as it was happening, I could see this all happening. And I was just kind of sitting back and
Like you're just in the
watching
middle of
myself.
work, like just
Yeah,
hanging out,
I was out doing my beat, right? Walking.
and it just out of nowhere,
Yeah, I just
this
started coming up.
this this arrow. Okay.
And I wasn't about to like break down in the middle of the street or anything, but I just started paying attention.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was watching this. I was like, oh, so what's the mind going to do now? And it started telling this narrative like, oh, it's too bad you're not with anyone, and you should really try to get out there and meet someone. And I was like, well, that's curious. Like, what about this sensation, right? Of feeling alone, and then all the like versions of the old story started to come up. This is why you are. This is how you are, and it's a sorry situation, and it's something to do in childhood, and blah blah blah. And that's what I heard, right? And I was just like, well, that's weird. Like, what's the point of that? And what about this sensation I'm having right now?
The
And
sensation was familiar.
it was definitely familiar.
Okay. And with the familiar, it's likely along came these.
Familiar story lines
Yeah.
to accompany it, right? That were invented in the first place or created in the first place to explain it when it first happened or along the way, right? Every time it did come up. There's got to be a reason I'm feeling this way, I think is kind of how I think of the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I sat with it, and that's when I contacted you. Like, I wasn't going away throughout the day. It was just like that was my day. And I contacted you and said, I think I just want to sit with this. And
Yeah. So that was Wednesday. Yeah. So did it ebb and flow during the day, or was it just right in your face the whole?
uh, it, it was right in my face for a good part of the day. And that's not to say, like, again, it wasn't like I was actually getting a bit emotional. Like I could feel like, oh, I'm not quite welling up with tears, but I'm just on the verge. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but it felt like it. So I think because of my experience in the past, there might also be an inbuilt expectation that, oh, this is going to get heavy, or it's going to get heavier, which is, I imagine my mind was anticipating that too, or my body. Um, so by the time I said I'm gonna sit with this,
Yeah.
and I got home and sort of did my choring about here, it slowly faded away. And like I didn't tell you that night, but it was like, oh yeah, I totally could have sat with Sean. It wouldn't have been a big deal.
Oh.
And then the next day there were just little hints and whispers, but nothing nearly as dramatic as the day before. And
Yeah, that was just like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I guess you just got home from work. I guess we were scheduled to sit to connect that night,
yeah,
Wednesday night, and
yeah,
that
and I
yeah,
think I was walking home when I texted you because I was feeling it then as well. And I was probably
yeah,
walking deliberately so that I wasn't on the bus in case I broke down, which didn't happen at all or nearly. Which again, I don't know, but I just imagine there's some conditioning there because of 5 years of like scratching at this stuff and then opening a wound and letting it all out and then falling back and feeling sort of incapacitated, disabled, if you will, for weeks and months at a time. Um,
So, so what was
yeah.
your reaction when that thought would come up that this is going to get really heavy?
Well, again, it was something I was watching, like I was
Yeah.
paying attention to it, and I think that's why I'm even expressing it now. Is just that in the moment when I had that anticipation or that feeling like, oh, this could get. I was like, well, could it? Like, do you know that? What is this sensation that's arising right now? And just sort of kept turning back to it, right?
Yeah.
to just look at it and be with it and not fixate on it, but just what's going on? What is this? Oh, it's heaviness, it's sadness, and I didn't get caught up in the story, other than clearing my slate for the day. I didn't think I was going to be down and out for months or weeks,
Yeah.
as in the past. Um, but just in this instance, it's like, well, maybe this is going to erupt tonight, and maybe it's good to just create the space for it, and that would be fine too. And it would have been fine had it happened, had I had some emotional release, or I mean, I'm shouldn't not shying away from that anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah, it just didn't. Just came and went. And I also think of it as again, like, see, it's so hard to untangle at times from the stories, because I was going to go right back to childhood there. Like, I remember having this feeling before in my life, surrounded by family, loved ones,
Right.
but having this profound sense of feeling alone. And I can't help but wonder if that's just not that existential feeling of separateness that we
Hmm.
experience in this form from time to time, right? Like when we're feeling disconnected.
So there wasn't any kind of actual event where everyone had left the house and you were all alone and
No, it was around, but I mean, in all honesty, too, uh, I didn't feel deeply connected either with those people at the time in those moments
your
that were
family.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Right. So, but I guess what I'm just seeing, because sometimes, right? I mean, it's actual an event that occurred, and
Right.
and the emotions and the feelings in the moment are can be quite clearly linked to that event. But and then so then sometimes for the rest of our life, that just gets imprinted, and so whenever we get that feeling, we
Then the
go.
story overlaps with the feeling, and yeah, and I again, that's I imagine there's something to that. I imagine this was born at a time that I wasn't forming memories, or that I have any clear recollection in my mind.
Could have been when you were 1 or 2, and
Yeah, like a
you
lot
were.
a lot happened to me early on that could trigger this sort of thing, I imagine. Um, and at this point, I'm happy I can laugh about it in hindsight, and I hold no ill will to anyone, because I'm sure most of it was accidental to some extent, or beyond control, if you will. So so when it was coming up, yeah, I was just having that, and then the stories arrived. Oh, okay, I remember this. Okay, I'm familiar with both these patterns. And in sitting with it, like the rest of the week, the next few days where I wasn't high strung emotionally, I wasn't wound up over this feeling. It's still persisted kind of mildly in the background to some extent. I just ended up kind of diffusing with social interaction. I just ended up being a little more social for the next 2 days, as a cue or compensation for that feeling. I don't know, but it also led to some interesting things, where in being fairly present and understanding, because knowing that this sort of thing is going on inside of me, and then say not having things happen um, quickly or immediately on the job, looking for assistance or whatever, and things aren't. Someone opened up who I like. I don't know them very well personally, but we have a working relationship. and they were not able to get back to me in a timely manner and were very apologetic. And then just opened up. I didn't see the remain, like I only read the first part of the text, and it wasn't until that evening that I read the longer sort of after part. And it was a very raw and open, um, just divulgence. It just, I don't know why I'm telling you this. Is how it opened.
Mm.
There's just a lot of stuff going on in the person's life, and this is something. I get so confused by this at times because I don't know why they open up to me. But it happens so often. Anyway, it was touching in a way, that the person felt comfortable enough to open up like that, and it was refreshing to know for a change that I actually had something to offer, based on my own experience and just sharing what insights I had from grieving and basically going through that, right, and dealing with this stuff and letting it in and letting it wash over.
It'd be really interesting to ask some of those people, what was it that, why me, right? Why did, like, is this something you share with a lot of people? And what was it about? I'm not necessarily sure people would be able to identify it.
I don't think so, because he clearly said, I don't know why.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's not good enough.
I don't share
Let's
this
pry a little
generally,
bit.
and that's typically the opener. I don't usually share this with others. I don't know why I'm sharing it with you. And then the flow.
So, Venus, go back a bit. So when these
Mhm.
sensations were arising for you, and the narrative was coming along with it, was there any prescription that was coming along with it? Like, here's what we need to do to make this feeling go away.
Well, that's where the seeking out relationship comes in.
Right. So, okay, you need to connect
Find
with,
a partner. Find a
find a partner.
partner. Go find a woman. Like, what does that entail during a pandemic?
And that would make the feeling go away.
Yeah, yeah. But then also all the same confused thoughts around my struggles in relationships. And this is where the self-pitying part, when I said I don't want to call it self-pity, but I think it is self-pity. It's yeah, but whenever you get in a relationship, you can't handle, you can't be in the relationship because you feel so uncomfortable. And then I'd have to remind my mind.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's how it was. That's how it has occurred. It's not a permanent state necessarily, right? You've done a lot of work. So there's this dialogue in my mind, checking myself, if you will, or checking my mind
Yeah.
as it made all these leaps, right? Oh, you should feel sorry for yourself. You'll never be able to be in a relationship because of your childhood. It's like, no, relax. You've already been through this. It's not a big deal. You've already done the work.
Yeah, it's so bizarre when there's kind of these it takes two positions. One is, okay, this is what you need to do to make this go away. And then, oh, hang on a sec, but you won't be able to make that happen because blah, 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 blah.
And both are self-negating, if you will. Like, they don't lead anywhere necessarily, because you can decide on a course of action, right? But it's still meaningless in the sense that you're pursuing, like, okay, I'm going to go find a woman. Like, what does that even mean? What does it mean to engage in partnership or to develop something long term, right? There's a lot in that. It's not just an action you go out and do. And then on the other hand, the other one's talking you out of it. Well, don't even do that.
Yeah, it's just, it's when we pay attention to that, it's just so maddening, right? That there's just a sensation that arises, and here's what we need to do to make that sensation go away. Oh, here's why that's not going to be successful, and and here's all the hurdles we're going to have to overcome, and how we're not up to the task of doing this, or society's going to work against us or whatever, and like all from a sensation
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that that arises, and all of a sudden now we're fucked.
And that's that's the conclusion.
Yeah, basically you're fucked. No, we might as well.
Might as well throw in the towel.
Yeah, I mean it's mad, and gone taken to the nth degree, one can see how, like, even like self-harm, right, and suicide can come to that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in my own experience of it, right? In having suicidal ideation, considering all the different ways. The one thing that escapes consideration when you're actually focused on this sort of stuff, going, why is my mind telling me this? Is that, well, that's it. Like, why is my mind telling me this? What's going on in the biology
Mm-hmm.
that would compel the biology to go and toss itself off a cliff? What, where's the solution in that?
It's not even the bio. Yeah, I guess it is the
Or the
bio.
physiology or whatever's coming, because I think even the manifestation of those thoughts, right, is just a manifestation of physiology being out of whack.
Right.
So I was talking to I've been, this isn't an original concept by any stretch. It's something that I heard, didn't quite fully embrace it or understand it enough to embrace it at the time. But having been through the ringer on this, someone put forward, I think it was the guy who made this documentary regarding the care homes in Northern Europe for people with psychosis, and how they instead of putting them long term on medications, right, they find loving, stable environments, highly oriented towards tasks and structure, and see a tremendous result in the recovery of said people. And anyway, this person retired from therapeutic practice at some point, saying, and this is what struck me about like their perspective, like they stopped doing therapeutic work because they see basically all of the human condition being rooted in trauma related manifestations of dysfunction in adulthood. It's not dysfunction on its face, it's that our bodies get, and this is the part that I've pieced together through my own journey, is that when you experience those things early on that you have no control over, these traumas, it does condition your body and your physiology, right, to be in high stress or high alert, um, danger seeking sort of mode the whole time, right? Like so you're in like a perpetual low level fight or flight, and always on the cusp or border of triggering into a full fight or flight sort of mode. And having been through the whole like the DSM and exploring the different diagnoses, there is so much overlap between PTSD, major depression, anxiety disorder, hell, even in like things like schizophrenia, what we call schizophrenia, there are narrative components even in the manifestations of people going through so-called hallucinations, right? That go back to sort of an original source, right? An original trigger, if you will. And so in my own experience of going through of living my life basically in high stress alert, it's like getting a steady cortisol dump in your body, which is like a low level um, what's, oh my God, I can't think of what's the chemical you get in fight or flight. The
Endorphin?
not endorphin, the one that gives you
S-
super
s-
strength.
Serotonin?
Adrenaline.
Adrenaline.
So cortisol's like a low level adrenaline. Like, so your body's under constant stress, this thing,
So
keeping
that
your
you
body
can so that you
right.
can fight or flight.
When and in anticipation of fight. So it's like living in anticipation of fight or flight with a no real danger present, right? Your body's kind of locked into this.
Right? Which is stress.
And it's ongoing, it's perpetual stress, right? There's no relief from it. Until you take away the story, which somehow mystically shifts all of
Mystically. So hang on. So just to go back,
yeah.
you started saying that he stopped or couldn't see the benefit of therapeutic work. So why was that?
I don't know. I don't know. I've
Oh,
been because I just started doing the research after watching those films. I looked into him a little more to see so what, where's he coming from? And he's got his own website. I'll send you links. I think I have it bookmarked somewhere, but my understanding is he's just kind of turned to an approach of like, I think just breeding compassion and empathy. As far as I can tell, I'd have to kind of look more deeply at it, but it just
mm,
seems like that's what he focuses his work on now instead of trying to heal. Like it's because the whole concept of healing in the well, I would be reading too much into it, speculating why. He's just changed his approach to how he deals with these things.
so looking at it through the what we talk about a lot through the changing the narrative. uh, What's your sense of how his difference in approach changes the narrative?
I can't comment much on him and his approach because I
Okay.
haven't delved deeply into it beyond reading that blurb that he shared, that having produced those films and having been an active practitioner, he just stopped and sort of explained why in a
All right.
nutshell. So I don't know much about it.
Well, let's say, okay, let's not try and speculate him. Let's just say that shifting it to one of carrying compassion, I don't want to say versus healing because that seems like healing, but
Well, okay, so my own sense of that shift,
yeah.
I'd heard terms like self-care and self-love. I'd heard those all my life, or at least self-care I heard for the first time in my 30s. What the hell does that mean? And I literally didn't understand what it meant, right? And then I would look it up, like, oh, get a good sleep, and don't smoke and drink, and make sure you have your cereal in the morning. I was like, all right. It didn't connect with me. It didn't mean anything to me. Um, and it wasn't until I don't know when it happened. I don't. There's no. I can't think of a specific moment, but I remember um, just a sense of being not just okay, but I guess just acceptance, like a self acceptance, acceptance that there is this thing called self that has sort of a narrative b- structure to it or a belief in itself. Like the fact that I can tell the story means it must have existed. um, and it's foundational to a sense of identity early on, but it's also incredibly anxiety inducing in
What's anxiety inducing?
the sense of self, the
Yeah.
narrative, like the story structure. Again, when I think of this most recent experience and contrast that to my lived experience with identifying with that feeling and then having the attached story and then writing the story. And what I mean is like identifying with that story, like, yeah, all that stuff did happen to me when I was young. And that is why this is never going to happen. And it's not fair. And then be all upset. And I would hitch a ride with that feeling and interpretation of it. And then I'd be stamping my feet and kicking things, like acting out. Um, and really being fully immersed in the story, like to the extent that then everything presently actually occurring around me, I could not see because I was so wrapped up in identifying with that feeling and the story attached to it. Um, it literally pulls you out of the moment. Like it defies being in the moment. You can't be in the moment when you're attached to the past, when you're focused on it.
Well, that's what's happening in the moment. Is your immersion in the stories.
But so that's the curious thing though, right? That's the curious thing though of being able to see it as it's happening. And that's very much what was occurring in the moment. Like this feeling came up, then the stories start coming up. Well, what are you going to do about this feeling? And why do you have this feeling in the first place? And then it amplifies, like I can almost feel it amplifying the sensation, right? The more that I'm like, the more that I'm believing I am that story in the moment, the more it amplifies the sensation and the more like
Yeah, it kind of feeds itself, and
it feeds itself and it builds.
yeah,
Like it's like that's the power you give it is fixation. It's like identifying this is who I am. And it kind of fixes it rather. So I recognize that had I continued to hitch a ride on the narrative, I know where that leads to based on my past experience. In fact, that might have what led me to breaking down and having a weeping night all night had I hung on to the narrative.
mm,
And not because of, at this point, some repressed emotion, but because I'm identifying with the story that's attached to this sensation that I'm very familiar with. And in fixating on it, it becomes overwhelming, right? Or it becomes what I'm experiencing because that's the thing I'm focused on and giving my attention to it. So I don't see it as like it's not suppression to just go, oh, I see what's happening. And I don't need to go along with it. Like I don't need to hitch a ride on this. I still have exactly what I'm doing before me to do, and there is no quick fix to this thing. It's just something that's happening right now. And
right.
I let it then it passed. At some point, it just did its thing, arose, and then dipped back under the whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's some uh, uh, schools of thought that you should have um, dove into it and fully expressed it and really immersed yourself in that, right? So, and that by doing so, it would extract it from your psyche, and then theoretically, then you would not have to deal with this again. So and through that lens, then yeah, well, you're not. then they would say you're suppressing it because you're not diving in. Eh, which, in my experience, it doesn't actually extract it.
No.
And it just sets up a pattern of, oh, there's more work to do here.
Right. Yeah, and in my
Or
experience,
I haven't done the work right, or I'm not being
I gotta try harder.
right. I'm holding back, or it's deeper.
Yeah, and I'm still of two, like, the way you just articulated that. I'm in agreement with, like, the description of that school of thought. My previous experience of going through it too, though, is, when I was, well, maybe that's just what was happening in the moment. This is my point. When stuff comes up, sometimes it can be overwhelming if it is something you've ignored for a long time. And again, this is storytelling in a way, but like in the experience of going through the therapeutic process, when I crashed and had all sorts of things going on physically, mentally, uh, physiologically, just everything was out of balance. Everything was needed work. And the way it manifested, though, the emotional, there was stuff that I did not want to look at from the narrative perspective. And pushing through that, I wonder if that does just amplify those sensations in the moment. Well, now that's a curious track.
It is. I mean, one doesn't know until they're actually
Yeah,
experiencing it. But
because it
like you
was
said,
just overwhelming. At some point, it was just overwhelming, and that's how it was. That's what was going on.
but even that label, right, overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
would be interesting. Like,
It
what?
feels overwhelming,
Well,
but it's not
right,
overwhelming because you're going through it.
but
You're not
is
going to die.
right. You're not gonna die. But the flight or fight gets kicked in for sure. But is this? But then it's hard. Like, what is just the sensation in itself overwhelming, or is it the story that we tell about the sensation and having, right? I mean, you could just, even the experience you had during the week, that could have become quite overwhelming, right? So you've got to find a mate. You'll never find a mate. Come on, you got to find one. You'll never find one. You're gonna find one, right? That could have just that could have become quite overwhelming. It's like overwhelming sense that. So what is overwhelming?
It's a sense that you can't handle what's happening. That's how I would best express it.
Yeah,
Like you
but
create a fear of actually just handling whatever's coming up.
mhm.
It's too much.
Right, right. So yeah, and perhaps sometimes sensations are really, really intense. I mean, like from the kind of Buddhist Vipassana perspective, sometimes when we sit through really, really uncomfortable sensations, right, it can feel like we're going to die, right? It can feel like we're it's going to be the end of us. And And when we sit through it, I mean, the mind is definitely telling the story of doom, and this is too much. And maybe in some ways that's kind of one of the benefits of it, is we actually sit through that story of too much, and when we
Mm.
get to see that, we just we focus, we come to our breathing, we go to this deep into the sensation, come out of it, do different techniques, and then it passes, right? So yeah, I could see where sensations in themselves can be, I mean, that it would seem that that's why substances are so prevalent in our world, because they are the definite prescription for overwhelm,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because it literally it is, again, from my own experience, that not wanting to experience what we think is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I hear it expressed as such, like when I've asked people, what if you just tried crying, because they see you're trying to like shut it down. Like, I'm afraid that if I started, it would never stop.
Yeah, that's so common. And like
Yeah.
people in the healing process, that's such a bizarre story the mind has, right? That if I go into this pain, it'll never end. And I mean,
I mean, you might get some insights into the meaninglessness of existence, but the pain will end.
yeah. But I think that's that doorway that is part of the healing process, right? The doorway that one has to go through is to, even faced with that story that this will never end, I'm going to take that chance and I'm going to go through it anyways. And it's until we see that, oh, actually it does end, then we start being able to just allow those sensations
Mhm.
to arise. And
Yeah, there's definitely like a tipping point there, right? When to have gone, yeah, because I find myself relating to like a before and after sort of picture of my experience, right? And sort of the pre willingness to go through the door, and the post, and the dramatic changes that occurred after, um, and that are continuing to occur in a lot of ways, right? Even I think even being able to see this stuff in real time as it arises, it's a huge shift in my perception, or at
yeah,
least I can distinguish between what my mind activity is doing in interpreting all this stuff and creating the stories around it.
yeah. Like people always, when you talk about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, and right, they just see it as, well, I'm going to sit and meditate and watch my breath and struggle with that. How is that at all going to help me with my life, right? And you just described, this is exactly how it's going to help you.
Yeah. Yeah. and
That-
and I don't know that, but I also don't know that, because I'd heard it and read it in books, like where they speak of, you're watching your mind, you watch the thoughts come up, don't try to do anything with them, just pay attention. Well,
Mhm.
but I didn't see the value in that
It
in
just
any
seems
way.
so basic.
It's like,
It's
what's the
it's
point?
yeah.
what am I going to gain from it?
Exactly.
And you're right, though, that in hindsight, I don't know that I would not have recognized the value of this, right? Until I actually purposely engaged in it.
Mm-hmm.
When all the barriers, and that was another point though, right? When you and I connected, it's that all the barriers were gone at that point. Like, what was I resisting? I had nothing to lose except everything.
Yeah. And you recognize that's already lost. I never had it in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's curious, like, it's not the kind of thing that an ambitious person sets themselves upon.
Well,
Like,
no, it is.
ambitions are directed towards.
Well, as long as the narrative is bearing fruit,
Mhm.
then why would you?
Yeah, exactly. I concur with that. High functioning materialists.
Oh yeah, that's not. One thing that struck me when we were this whole thing, like I mean, to come back and is just it's so fascinating to me how the story of the self hijacks the nervous system, right, and hijacks the fight or flight, which was designed to keep the organism safe, right, and to keep it going long enough to produce more, reproduce more, and and for so much in society, it's 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 hijacked by the sense of self, and it's like no longer about keeping the organism safe. It's about keeping the self safe and keeping the identity.
The image of the self.
Yeah, yeah, it's keeping the identity, the story intact. All right, it's just
I think
quite amazing. Like there should
it
be
is
a
amazing. And
switch
then
that we can say like, no, I don't want to use it for that. Switch. Only when my organism's in trouble does the fight or flight kick in. It doesn't kick in for this narrative.
for Colin, yeah, and that's this, and then when you look at societally how we are structured, right? We have all these enabling features to promote that narcissistic aspect of ourselves through the media consumption, right? Through media consumption, and like it's omnipresent, it's everywhere, and it's constant. It's now in our, like, in our hands, the device to record ourselves, to project uh, through the interweb, to get likes, and it's all just image based. Like, it's all so superficial, but people can't see,
Yeah, that's why I do this.
right? This isn't even real.
It's not working.
Hey, look at me, look at me. It involves a little more self promotion. You got to have something to sell.
Mhm.
Not, hey, you know that Instagram account that you've monetized to get this much money? Well, you might want to explore it. Your sense of self, detached from all of this.
Well, that's a little bit what Jim Carrey seems to have done. He's used that popularity and his in people's interest in him is probably nosedived. Since he's like, what the heck are you talking about? No, I want to be as rich and famous as you.
Celebrity and wealth are not all they're cracked up to be. Boo!
Yeah, well, let's trade places. Let me be the one to figure that out. No, you don't need to. You don't need to go through all this figured out. Shut up. I want to.
Shut up and
He's
teach me how to contort my face.
he's lying.
He must be lying. He's the only one talking about
Yeah.
it.
All right, I think I'm gonna to sign off. You got anything else to add about all that?
Not presently.
Okay.